Welcome to another episode of Anatomy of Failure, the podcast where we dissect what went wrong so you can get it right. I'm your host, Ivy Walker, and this is episode 7, A Boardroom Twist, the unexpected and abrupt unraveling of a once promising biotech startup. My guest today is Rusty Williams, founder of Walking Fish, a biotech venture that was working to bring cutting-edge protein therapies to market. In this episode, Rusty will offer some insights into what can go wrong when a company and its venture capitalists aren't aligned. Ready to dive in? Let's get started. Rusty Williams, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me today.
Glad to be here with you.
So before we dive in and talk about the company that Walking Fish that I invited you here to talk about, can you give us a little bit about your background and about, whether or not you desire to be an entrepreneur early on?
Yeah, sure. As a kid, I had various businesses that I started, and I did learn to fail fast from those small enterprises. I grew up in a rural area in the Appalachian Mountains. And the way I got into science and medicine was that I was a Boy Scout, and on the back page of the Boy Scouts were advertisements. And I read one of those, and it advertised science kits. You could send in $1, and they'd send you a little canister with a science kit in it. And I did that every month, and that got me interested in science. And when I was in high school, my older neighbor had gone to the Vietnam War, and he left with me, he bequeathed to me his Scientific Americans, and I kind of carted those over to my house and tried to read them, tried to understand them. That further intrigued me about science. There wasn't great science instruction in my school, but I had heard about a science fair that was a district science fair outside of my school. And I competed in that science fair every year, beginning 8th grade. And the last 3 years, I won the state science fair in 2 different categories, physical sciences and one in biology. I won the top science prizes for both of those areas, competing under an alias. I was Rusty Williams and Tom Williams. So I pulled it off somehow. But that really solidified my interest in science. And then, I was not really interested in being an entrepreneur at that time. I wanted to be a scientist, and I really did also want to fly jet planes. The latter never materialized, so I became a scientist. I went to college, and I majored in chemistry and physics, and had planned to go into graduate school in physical sciences. But the first week of my senior year, I dropped out of college due to a major football injury.
Oh, so you were an athlete as well.
I was an athlete as well. And after a lot of surgery, I decided that I didn't want to go live in an ivory tower professionally. I wanted to do something in which I could see a more immediate, beneficial impact on people. Mm-hmm. And while in my convalescence from the knee surgeries, I started a rock band. Thought I wanted to be a musician. I was a musician. I didn't say good musician. And we, Rusty and the Oxidations.
Very sciencey name.
yeah, right. A nerdy name. It failed fast. And so I went back to working as a lab technician to support myself. And I commuted to the University of Georgia, an hour from my home. And then I decided that I could probably be both a scientist and a physician if I got into one of these MD, PhD programs, which were funded. And so Duke University, I convinced them to take me, even though I had no college degree, had never taken the MCATs. I didn't even have pre-med courses, most of them. And what luck, I got into that. That's a long story how I did, but I was very lucky and I had some real mentors then who helped me get into that program. Then I went into clinical medicine at Mass General Hospital. I loved it. I loved being a doctor. I loved taking care of patients. I became enamored with cardiology, primarily because the heart moved and I could, do things with wires and probes and things to the heart. So I loved practicing interventional cardiology, and I considered focusing on that purely and foregoing any scientific career. But then eventually, given my personality, I thought that I would get bored doing that and doing approximately the same good thing over and over again. And so I decided to go back to science. So while I was still practicing at Mass General Hospital, I applied for an American Heart Association grant. And I got it. And so an investigator there who later was pivotal in another part of my career, loaned me his lab space, Charles Homsey, so I could start work doing some research on the side. I started, then I got a tiny lab after I got the American Heart Association grant. And I worked on two completely brand new projects. And both of them showed early success just by myself, and eventually I could hire one technician. Then I was contacted by the Howard Hughes Institute, which at that time was a sort of clandestine operation. But I was lucky enough that they had an interest in me for various reasons. And that made it possible for me to expand my lab and to move to UCSF, University of California at San Francisco. There my group grew, and the group was making a lot of cool discoveries and publishing them at a high rate. I was in heaven. I loved that too, just as much as I loved the clinical medicine, but I moved more and more to science and did less clinical medicine. Then one day, I was in my tiny office that had two centrifuges in it with me, and a banker walked down the hall and came into my office, Lee Douglas. And it was just a cold call. And he told me that somebody told him that I had good ideas. And he asked me if I had ideas about starting a biotech company.
Oh, interesting.
Just kind of out of the blue. And I told him about some thoughts I had. And these discussions, Lee and I started, and eventually brought in some other co-founders, started Core Therapeutics. And at Core, so that really was the first real biotech entrepreneurial activity I engaged in, almost by accident. And Core developed the drug, discovered and developed the drug Integralin, based on screening snake venoms for antiplatelet activity. So these were good for, it was a good treatment for impending heart attacks.
So you were sort of an accidental entrepreneur.
Accidental, yeah. I'd shown signs of that at my young age. I didn't really go through that, but I was accidental. In reality, I was just content to have my career and keep going in the science and the medicine. And then this got me into biotech. And the fact that it was successful, the company was wildly successful and was eventually acquired for quite a large amount of money. Also, it made me think it was easy. Well, that was wrong. So it was just lucky. And but I did realize that the ideas that I had and my colleagues had could be translated to patient benefit much more quickly in industry than in academia. And despite the fact that I was well funded in the Howard Hughes Institute and all of that, I made a leap to Chiron Corporation. Bill Rudder, who was the founder of Chiron and was chairman, he asked me to be head of R&D there. So I made the leap, and it was it became a larger company. And at first I was a terrible manager of R&D. I thought that I was smart, but then I found out that being scientifically smart wasn't good enough. There was a lot I didn't know that pertained to industry. I didn't really know how to discover drugs. Just the first attempt at core that my team made was successful. I didn't know all the ins and outs, and I clearly didn't know how to run clinical trials. I thought since I was a physician that would be easy, but that wasn't the case. And so eventually I learned a lot at Chiron from the people I hired. And some of them are my best friends today. They taught me a lot.
So you surrounded yourself with smart people. And
I'll come back to that. Not only smart people, but people I trusted and could learn from. And I wasn't embarrassed to admit that I didn't know stuff. I learned to listen, as I just said, with the people I hired and to other people as well. When I realized Chiron was about to be acquired by Novartis, I couldn't see myself working for a large pharma company, so I decided to leave and start a new company just on some ideas that I had, and I started 5' Therapeutics. So that's kind of the trajectory I had up until later. We can go into that later, but that's how I became an entrepreneur. First accidental, and then later it was quite deliberate.
Yeah, and you pointed out some lessons in there that we'll come back to. But tell us what became of 5'.
Well, so at 5', I have a few lessons I learned there. First, I was the sole founder. And that was a mistake. And I don't know that it reflected arrogance. It just reflected where I was at the time. But being a sole founder is really hard. I should have had a colleague or two to help me start the company.
Well, why did you choose to be a sole founder?
Just because I had these ideas and nobody else did. So I didn't ask a lot of people, but I just thought I could do it. Again, it was naivete more than arrogance. I just thought I could do it. And I would hire people. So I went about raising money. I got some help, again, from Lee Douglas, who we were co-founders of Forbit. He kind of helped me, advise me the early days of 5'. And I got the really super team of venture capitalists to fund the company from the beginning. And that was key because they worked well as a team. They knew what they were doing. They were supportive of my kind of wild ideas. They were a little bit wild, but they were at least very bold. And they were supportive of that. And that's what made it get off the ground, helped it get off the ground. So I built a team there, fabulous people I worked with. That's what I learned at Chiron. I was around myself with the best people I could find. And from the technical side to the business side to the clinical side, finance side, everything. And we grew the company. Our first product candidate failed. The second one was right on the cusp, and we stopped it because we had a third one that came that looked really good. And so we really focused on the third one, and that turned out to be extremely successful. But we faced some really big difficulties. We almost completely ran out of cash twice. And somehow we pulled rabbits out of the hat. That led to the acquisition of the company by Amgen at $1.9 billion a few years ago.
So that brings us to Walking Fish.
Yeah.
And this is, you have up to this point, have been wildly successful in your career. I mean, just what you've described, there were 3 companies that you were either a founder of or a part of that were acquired. And so you had successful exits from those businesses.
Right.
So talk about Walking Fish. Tell us first, what was the vision for Walking Fish and what excited you about starting another company?
Yeah. So for years, I'd worked on protein therapies, protein drugs. And it was apparent to me, as to most people, that these drugs had some liabilities and that for chronic therapy, outpatient therapy, the drugs had to be administered intravenously or in some cases subcutaneously, but mostly intravenously at regular intervals. It was inconvenient for the patients. Sometimes there were infusion reactions. So the idea was to make a cell produce a protein on a steady basis and hopefully have a kind of one-time therapy or at most once-a-year therapy where you would implant the cells or engraft the cells.
So you were seeing success in the lab.
Oh, great success in the lab. And we were on track. So good data, preclinically, great team. Again, unbelievable team. And it might have even been better than the 5' team. Both were great.
So what went wrong?
Okay, well, I think there were a few things that went wrong. One, this was, we had our A round, and then in 2023, mid-2023, we went out to start to raise a B round.
And you raised your A round in 2021?
2022, early 2022.
Okay. And so now it's 2023 and you're going out for your B round.
In the late summer of 2023, our insiders, the people who did the A round. Oh, one thing that happened early 2023 was that the three largest investors, each of those 3 investment firms, the person who represented us in the firm and who was on our board left the firm. And so there was a replacement. So we had new people. So
you're the representatives of your equity investors. Yeah. Those individuals left your board.
Left our board.
And they were replaced.
They were replaced with people who understandably were less passionate. They didn't initiate this investment. And in my view, were less experienced. Mm-hmm. So that happened, and that dynamic, and one of the firms actually spun our company and a number of other companies out into a separate firm, a VC firm that was related but separate. That also hurt us because that firm had kind of a different set of goals. So anyway, so here we were raising money. We had a big expense coming up for the trial. Everything was on track for the trial. Great enthusiasm. In the course of the last half of 2023, we had met with quite a few investors, but the financing environment for B rounds was getting increasingly difficult. Most of the company, so we had a commitment from our internal investors, insiders, to fund the B round if we needed to. We were looking for external investors as well, new investors.
So your existing investors had committed to fund the B round. Were they going
as of August?
As of August, they would cover the full B round if you didn't find external investors.
Yeah, we had a target, but they said they would backstop it. We didn't have a target for getting external, and we were working hard to do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then in December of 2023, we had several things happen. One is we did get, in December and January 2024, we were notified that we were about to get, it was a verbal, so it wasn't written, but we're 95% sure, I would say, to get about $30 to $35 million of external non-dilutive capital. Mm-hmm. That helped, but that didn't count towards this, according to our inside investors. So abruptly, I was at a board meeting for a nonprofit biotech enterprise, scientific enterprise, at a dinner, and I got a call from our lead investor, insider, and he told me that he was going to abruptly pull out. And we were too late then to really engage in finding another lead investor to change course, because we needed to get the money in. We were running out of cash. And that was a shock to me.
And what did he give you? Did the investor give you a reason?
I won't say exactly what he told me, because it was a little bit offensive. But it didn't sound like a reason to me. I didn't understand. It could be, my guess is maybe he was having trouble with other investments. Maybe his priorities changed. Mm-hmm. I'm just guessing, because he never had a conversation with me about that. And when I queried, I didn't understand it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That triggered a cascade over into January, so that the other insiders unraveled as well. And by the early February, we had a board meeting, and this first investor I mentioned, his representative on the board, said they wanted to shut down the company because they had done a calculation that our balance sheet showed that we were insolvent, barely, just be approaching insolvency. And that is, if you added up the rent commitments for the full term of the lease, that put us in negative territory with respect to the cash we had on hand. Now, generally, biotech companies weather that kind of thing, so that, you may have a 10-year lease, and that's a lot of money, and you don't really shut the company down if you don't have enough cash to cover that lease, typically. But that was the rationale at that point. So,
and this was the representative for the same investor who had decided to abruptly pull out.
Right. And so they wanted
And what they were doing effectively was capitalizing the leases.
Yes. That's it.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so that was shocking, even more shocking. And so suddenly, in February 2024, we were shut down. The others on the board went along with that. And we had to inform these agencies that we couldn't accept the $35 million of non-dilutive financing, which would have been wonderful, and would have more than covered what we were seeking externally, or approximately covered it, put it that way. So I think that's what happened.
And did you have any indication prior to going into December of 2023 that in a matter of months the company could be out of business?
No, it was a shock to me. There was one I made. I do know that I made mistakes. One mistake I made in October of 2023, a co-investor with the one who pulled out on our board, with a lot of bravado, told me that I should let him deal with the round and the insiders, and please let him do it and not me. I have a lot of experience with this, so I would typically have managed this myself, but he and the investor who pulled out asserted that they would see to it that the insiders were on track and that they would get it all worked out. It turned out maybe they were even in conflict. I don't really know the dynamic, but that was my mistake, is allowing this to sort of go that way.
And when you agreed to allow this board representative who was working for the investor to handle the insiders, the existing investors, what convinced you to, you normally would have handled it yourself. What convinced you to let him do that?
Well, he sounded so confident. And he was putting money in too. Equal amount as the one who pulled out. And he said he had it all under control and it was all wrapped up. And that if it's probably better for me not to get involved because it might undo what he had set up. So,
and do you feel like he was on top of it and just something happened? No, he wasn't.
I don't know. Obviously, obviously he wasn't.
Do you think it was really something he said or did that led the other investors to decide to pull out as well?
I have no idea. And as part of my learnings for this, there were a few parts of this process. Each firm has to do what they think is best. It was a tough environment for the firms too. And so they all have to do what they think they need to do. It was the abruptness of it that I felt was destructive to the company. And also it was the lack of transparency. If I had just known more, I feel like I could have worked with them to help solve the problems better. But I didn't. I couldn't tell what they were thinking. And when I asked, everything seemed opaque. And, maybe I didn't ask appropriately. At that point, I wasn't in conflict with them. Later, we can come to that in a minute. Later, I did come in conflict with them over some of the shutdown issues. But at that point, I felt that I was doing my part. I didn't understand what they were doing. But, part of the issue also was I didn't know these folks as well as I did the people who were on the board initially.
Right. This was a new group of investors.
It's a new group, yeah.
Right. And so this is a very different dynamic than what you'd experienced in your previous opportunities.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What did you learn from this very different experience?
Yeah, well, one thing I learned is to think carefully. This is on my side, right? I learned to think carefully about the capital needed for manufacturing of very expensive products like cell therapy. Think carefully about the implications of that for the trials. How much do the trials cost? Because I think that large amount of capital required to get data from the phase 1 because of the manufacturing costs for cell therapy. I think that was daunting for investors. Everybody was interested in the answer, and there was so much optimism from KOLs and from the investigators, and including our board, seemed to be optimistic about the prospects of the trial working out. There were a couple other companies working in the area. We felt our technology was at least as good, and we felt it was better than the others and had a good chance of working, and we felt that we had picked a great indication. But, I didn't recognize, first of all, I didn't know the financing environment would be that bad, and I didn't factor into that how expensive the CMC cost would be for that trial, and how that set a high bar for how much we had to raise to get to data from the phase 1 trial. I also learned to trust my instincts with respect. I didn't feel connected to these investors. I really didn't have a sense that we were connected. I didn't feel that there was anything antagonistic at that time, but I didn't feel as connected with them. And maybe I could have worked harder to stay connected. As I said, I thought I tried, but maybe that's another thing I learned, that if you have this sense of disconnection with the investors on a predominantly VC board, that's a problem.
And so you touched on the shutdown.
Yeah.
Tell us about that process and why and how it became acrimonious.
Yeah. So the shutdown was abrupt, as I said. And there was preoccupation with our assets and liabilities. At that point, we could pay all of our bills. But this preoccupation led to a big disagreement over severance. I felt that these employees were the cream of the crop. We were a very efficient organization. We weren't big, extremely efficient. The employees worked so hard. They did such a great job. Everything was moving forward. And the board, the investors on the board, didn't want to give severance. And I just feel like that's not right. And to have the rug pulled out from under them abruptly with no severance seemed, and there was an argument over severance and whether they deserved even a part of their 2023 bonus. So
a bonus that had been awarded but not paid.
Yes, it had been approved,
but not paid.
And so I felt that was mistreatment of employees, and that's where the acrimony was. And I ended up at odds with the board over that. At the end, I was able to convince the board to give a small amount of severance. It wasn't anywhere close to what most people would think would be appropriate in this situation, but they did give some. But that left there were a lot of scars from those disagreements and negotiations. That was my main concern at the end.
So you were running a venture-backed company. This is not the first time that you've run a venture-backed company. And we have a lot of individuals in our audience who either have brought in venture funds into their companies, or there are a lot that aspire to. And I don't think people fully appreciate what it means to have outside investors attached to your company. And so you talked about the change in representation from the VC firms that happened because people left. What advice would you give entrepreneurs when it comes to managing outside investors, particularly when they sit on your board?
Yeah. One thing I'd like to say is that in a good scenario, the investors don't just bring money. They bring ideas and help. And at Five Prime, that was clearly the dynamic. The board in the first few years of the company really helped make the company. They gave me a lot of ideas. They gave me support. I did have some trouble at the beginning, a funny kind of trouble. I was the founder, as I mentioned. I started the company, was the first CEO. And the board they thought of me as a scientist, clinician, and they didn't have confidence in me as a CEO. But later they developed that confidence, and so that was helpful. But that board was so supportive of what we were doing. They had alignment in the vision, and they really helped. And so don't look at the board members simply as financing vehicles. Look at them as people who can really help you in the company, and try to get the dynamic to work that way, because that really does help. You had suggested to me to make a sentence.
Your philosophy?
My philosophy. And that sentence for me would be bold, bring in the best people and listen to them, and adapt appropriately to the data. If you do those things, I think it'll work out.
What's the best advice you've ever received as an entrepreneur?
I would say when I was in the midst of Phi Prime, Bill Rudder, my former mentor, he was the founder of Chiron. I met with him just casually, and he said, yeah, just keep it up. Just keep going. So I'm glad to see you. Just keep going. And that sounds trivial, but that was really good advice.
So, Rusty, we've had an interesting conversation here. You've been wildly successful, and you also had a major setback, and that shapes the world that you live in. So, how have you taken that forward? What are you working on now, and how is this influencing what you're doing?
So, I'm working with several companies now as a board member or chairman. And the failure of Walking Fish probably didn't affect me as much as it would have if it were earlier in my career. Mm-hmm. So I was angry and disappointed, shocked, sad at what happened. But, it didn't take me too long to get back on an even keel.
Thank you so much for your time and for joining me today, Rusty. This has been an interesting conversation with a lot of key takeaways. So for everyone who's watching and listening, the key takeaways will be summarized in the show notes. But I love your philosophy and passing that on to entrepreneurs and helping them to build their career. But thank you so much for taking time today, Rusty.
Thank you, Ivy.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Anatomy of Failure. I hope you found Rusty's story as instructive as I did. He reminded us that failure can catch even the most seasoned entrepreneurs off guard, and that trust and transparency between you and your board are critical. We also learned that it's not just the big ideas and strong track records that make a venture successful. Often, it's the people you surround yourself with and the expectations you set for each other that determine how smoothly you navigate unforeseen setbacks. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who might find value in Rusty's experiences. Remember that you can always visit my website, anatomyoffailurepodcast.com, for show notes, insights, and updates on upcoming episodes. And as always, we welcome your ratings and reviews. They help Anatomy of Failure reach more listeners and continue bringing you candid conversations with entrepreneurs and leaders who aren't afraid to talk about what went wrong, why it went wrong, and what they learned. I'm Ivy Walker. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you next time.